Hey, everybody, welcome to Each Other News. We've got a treat for you. We've got Jeff Dance. He's from a company called Eclypses, and he's a chief innovation officer. And what a background! He used to lead the security for Lululemon, and he worked for Accenture and KPMG and a whole bunch of other companies. And we have the privilege of picking his brains today and figure out what's happening in the cyber world. Jeff, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you very kindly, Julian.
All right. Well, let's dig into this. First of all, give us a background of you. Like, what's your journey and how did you get
Oh,
to Eclipses?
I'd say it's kind of like a rough ocean ride on a 1700 sea vessel.
Wow.
Um, I mean, like I think everyone that gets into, I think at least cybersecurity and the certain aspects of it has a defensive. It's part of your nature. Like I grew up playing sports. I played defense. So my nature is to prevent opportunities for someone to exploit my own goal or my own products in this case, or my own infrastructure or my own data. So that's kind of gives you a look into the kind of the mindset that I have, I guess. When I look at how someone's going to attack me, I want to be able to play good defense. First rule of that is you better learn how to play offense, because if you don't understand the nature of the offensive side, you're not going to understand your own nature how to play defense. And I have a knack for it. And then I was very fortunate, I guess, as a young person to grow up with parents that were very literate. So I had tons of books in my house. Your ideas are no good on a piece of paper or in a meeting. You've got to be able to articulate them and articulate value at a simplistic and actionable level. So those are two, I guess, my biggest strengths. And then just being interested in it. Like I like conflict, not serious conflict, but I like conflict. I like
Yeah.
playing. I like that. If you don't like that, this is not the industry for you. Because it's adversarial by its nature. So you have to like that. You have to like that back and forth. And then from there, yeah, I just have been very fortunate. I've worked hard, been able to articulate certain things, and being able to get my projects going and reach measurable outcomes. So those are, I've worked on a few different stock exchanges for large companies, 100 countries in 160 cities. I've been all over the world, from East Africa, and developing and building infrastructure to help people that are unbanked be banked. And then like every major city that's got telecom, banking, oil, some sort of modern infrastructure, I've generally been there and
Wow.
solving the same problems.
I mean, they all have the same problem, don't they? Right. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just like how much you want to, invest and what's your risk tolerance, if you don't want to get hacked, then there's a lot of things you got to do to prevent that, right?
And hacking's interesting, right? Because it's a human element to a technology problem.
Hmm.
Well, you can automate some of it. It still requires a human brain to be able to execute the intricacies of it. So you have to be able to at least think like it. I ran enough red teams to understand that. That the people that do that kind of work, they don't think normally. They want to take. I mean, again, it's human nature. You're finding just ways to automate that nature of taking things that aren't yours, or, that's the adversarial point of it. Um, and I'll say this, it's, when you're getting hacked, that's not just a technical issue, it's a business issue. And I think part of the landscape that's changed that people don't recognize is that the biggest, and this is my opinion, I'm not saying this is a fact, but in my observation at least, the largest asset on a company's balance sheet these days is their data. The inverse of that is that it's also their largest material risk now. And it goes on beyond material to reputational, transactional, right? It's like, you see someone gets hacked, people change their behavior like that. It's trust is the ultimate currency. So
Hmm.
if someone can't trust it, they change their behavior. We've all seen that over the course of 20 years now, or 25 years since this has started. Started kind of with Target. People figured out the scale of that it could go. And
Hmm.
then that changed that whole program. It died, right? And that's what it goes to, is that intimately people know that it affects trust. But the landscape is changing, and what used to be more of like a head-on collision,
Hmm.
um, is now it's getting sophisticated, because you solve that problem, so then they adapt. Then you got to solve that problem, then they adapt. And really, the battleground of the landscape now is the data.
Hmm.
We're really getting into. I was like, hey, we've set up these massive, every company now, right? And massive data exchanges, APIs, automated, that everyone's
Hmm.
pulling and grepping and getting and all this fun stuff. But, say, when was the last, so what's the behaviors that you want on these things? Well, when was the
Mm.
last time you changed your keys? They don't. So you've got a behavioral issue around automated technology and, so I've seen this, I've done this over and over again, and the data is only increased in value.
Mm.
And this is, I think, in the last report, they estimate it's like a $10.5 trillion economy now around stolen data, credentials, persistent access, and the time goes up that the people are spending on your data points to something like 277 days. Each report has a little different flavor on that. Some say it's 220, some say it's 300, but it's longer than I'd like.
Mm.
And
Well, you actually touch on it. I mean, it's kind of like becoming the family jewels, right? Your
yeah,
data, the new oil type thing, and we got a lot of data. Everybody's got a lot of data, and a lot of people are touching that data every day, right? You got APIs accessing data. You got your supply chain, accessing your data. You've got your employees, obviously, but then your employees take all the stuff home, right? And then they're accessing data from a remote location. So the amount of entry points, I could say, windows into your data, it seems to be extreme these days, to say the least. So it's a monumental problem, Jeff. So
yeah.
in your experience, what are some of the best practices that you're seeing, or maybe just start there? Like maybe just start by, what do you see that people are just not doing that is just easy fixes?
I think, easy is relative in this world.
Yeah,
You
I
got
shouldn't
you
have
got
said
eight
that.
you got 8,000 endpoints. That's not an easy fix, right? And
No.
that's the problem. The problem goes from small to exponential quickly. Um, but I still think there's a lot of improvement that can happen around general data hygiene. Tokens are a big one, man. Every time I've done a red team, I have like a list of spreadsheets of tokens that I get because they're just out there and they
Mm.
don't rotate them. Rotating of keys, moving away from session-based encryption, things like that allow. But we've grown up in this world that we say, well, this is the way it works, right? Um, so here's something that we were dealing with a guy that does red teaming for the government and in an adversarial manner for our government. So it's all good. It's only when it's
Mm.
us that we're a little unhappy with it. Um, but we were talking about our technology and how we solve this problem. And he goes, well, this is a knock-on effect now. He goes, now we can actually operate anywhere we want, and our data is always secure. Now, it wasn't something we intended as an outcome, but the way we had to engineer the product, he's like, that's incredible because now I don't have to worry about any foreign operators looking at your data. I know for a lot of people that aren't in the industry outside of America, they don't let you have your own data. They look at it, right?
Mm.
So those are one of the things that it's like, so just a good hygiene is just rotate your tokens, rotate your keys, rotate your TLS certificates, good code on the left-hand side, like make sure you're running multiple checks, your IS, your SAS, your DAS, make sure that you're producing the cleanest, highest quality code and applications you can, and manage more of your endpoint. I mean, I chat with guys from all over the enterprise, right? Like it's, as much as the enterprises don't talk to each other, us guys have to because we're facing the same risks.
For
And
sure.
one of the things is like, we say like unmanaged and
Mhm.
managed API
Mhm.
endpoints. You're not managing them. You stand them
Yeah.
up, they go. So anything you can do to introduce improve hygiene there is going to be. When I say hygiene, I just mean different behaviors and automating them so that they
Mhm.
apply to all the endpoints, so that you're reducing your attack surface and exposure. That's easier said than done.
But at least it's something to aspire
Yeah.
to at the very least. But Jeff, with your experience, right? Let's say we wanted to score, benchmark, the average, base out there to see how good are they doing the right things to protect their companies on a scale of like 0 to 10. From the ones that you've seen, where do you see, the good ones are and the bad ones are?
I'll say this: there will be no 1 out of 10.
Mm.
You'll get some nines, just because it's like this. You can build a perfect house, but it won't have windows or doors. The minute that you put windows and doors in, you invite vulnerability and risk.
Yeah.
So what they understand is that the risk lies with the data, how they exchange it. That mindset of, instead of treat, so I would say even today, people treat it as a flat asset. Oh, it's just the data.
Mm.
It works that way until you get I've done a lot of turnarounds for companies after they've gotten breached.
Mm,
One was like 250 million.
mm,
This is the pharmaceuticals, and yeah, they're like, well, it's just the data. We got to protect it. I'm like, okay. Um, and I would say the one thing you do is if you think you have risk, test, test, and test and test.
mm,
Right? Like, hey, even to the point of getting a third party pen test, get it done. You want to know what facing the world where your weaknesses are and you treat them. If you're waiting like 6 months for a release, you're living with that 6 month window. That's where
mm,
you can close those windows as quickly as you want. The tighter you can get those windows closed, the better, the more amount of just sunlight you're letting in. So I try not to speak in too technical terms because I want people to understand is like, there's
for
a need for
sure.
the window to let in light. So, data doesn't have a lot of value if it can't be shared or exchanged.
Mm,
It is a value creating asset. So we want to do that the right way. And you can shorten those windows up and shorten your risk by treating the data as something that doesn't have a punitive value, but
mm,
go if you can sit down with your CROs or your CFOs and say, guys, like, hey, our data is worth this much.
mm.
This is our volume of data. This is what it's worth. This is what an impact of breach is going to look like. And it's around $8 million now, give or take, depending on the regulated industry. Is that worth protecting? And what are we doing to protect it? And is our budget at the level we need to protect it? And don't get sucked into vendors, deal with capabilities. You need certain capabilities to deal with things.
Mm.
And you want the capabilities and the right technology to serve your interests, not what a vendor tells you is the right thing to do. But that's the architect in me speaking.
Some good advice, you know. So if nobody is really at a 10, which I can
Yeah.
imagine, right? Because I mean, how do you get to a 10, right? You literally have to be a bunker in the ground with no windows, no access, no air. So
And the old government data centers,
yeah,
mainframe data centers with no internet connection, perfect.
yeah, that's that would be a 10.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
Outside of
literally would
that,
have to crawl in some spaces to get it. Um,
well, you have to get through a perimeter.
yeah.
Then you have to have access. You have to have ID. You have to get through a door, a man trap. Then you have to swipe it. Everything's so yeah. That's pretty much. And then the data never leaves there. So
Yeah,
that's not
exactly.
that's not realistic though.
Yeah. So the mere mortals don't have that access. So in general, you know, it seems like depending on who I speak to, they would kind of rate the average around a 6, 7, right?
Yeah, I
And
would.
yeah,
That's fair. I would say it would go 5, 6, 7, depending. And then there's modifiers there. Like if they're in a highly regulated industry, they're going to pay more attention.
yes,
If they're not, they're going to be more passive, and then that will slide down. But that's
yeah.
where I would say the bulk would sit.
So these days, Jeff, it's like it's almost like a silly conversation to be able to try to explain to someone like, hey, you need to have a cybersecurity protection for your business, and then trying to explain to them, you know, what the outcomes are if you don't, and if you get hacked, the social impact, the business impact. I mean, we could just go on and on. It's almost like we're telling people, you know, it's a really good idea to get a health checkup because you know one day you could have a problem. It's becoming like obvious, and the challenge that I feel is that people are saying, wait a minute, you know, we get it, but how much are we going to afford to spend on cybersecurity compared to the risk that we're going to, you know, able to tolerate? And they're sort of trying to juggle this.
Yeah.
Um, how do you get around that affordability? Of course, if someone's got all the money in the world, banks and usual, you know, they go crazy, but
Nobody does. Even the
nobody
banks
does.
don't, right? So at the end of the day, it's like if you don't understand, right? Like so there's two sides to that conversation. And one is, does the client actually understand, or does your potential client understand the value of their own data?
Hmm.
It's a
Maybe
good
not.
it's a good question. Hey guys, what is your data worth? Well, we just want to say if 1 gig gets hacked, that's going to cost you about $8 million in your industry. Oh, so if they haven't had to think like that and classify and put a value to the data, you can help them do that and say, okay, that's what it works at. Now, what is it going to cost for you not to run your business, right? There's been some like MGM learned that one the hard way. United Health learned that the hard way.
Hmm.
So imagine if they just spent $2 million with someone like
Hmm.
me.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have had the problem. Would that have been worth it to solve $1 billion problem?
In
So I think,
hindsight, yes, right? But when they're doing it, they're thinking, do we really need to spend that extra coin? Who's going to hack us? something like that, I guess.
The problem is you deal with, again, right? The limitation is always human behavior.
Mm,
We don't learn in ephemeral terms, or we don't learn from meta, right? We
yeah.
don't go like, hey, that happened to United Health. We go, that won't happen to us. And then what happens is we don't change our behavior until we get the experience and the impact. Now, what happens is if you have good risk managers at your company that are paying attention to that, they're going to say, hey guys, we don't need to worry about these 7 things, but these 3 things, they could have made a big difference. And that's really because what people don't like is they don't want to sit down to a buffet of, hey man, I got every single option in the world for cybersecurity. How do we, what caused that problem? What can I do to target that and remove that risk from my organization? And that's where it's like people are selling software and solutions and scale, but and I know the guys that I deal with, we're targeting that because I read those reports and go, okay, so they got hammered by credentials. How am I dealing with that?
Mm,
And what third parties are in my ecosystem, right? Because it's not just that. It's got Microsoft. I might have SailPoint. I might have Ping. I might have all these other identity providers. Are they secure? Am I adding more risk than I need to treat that?
mm,
Or is there something that I can do in my own behavior and automate from an engineering perspective and not create an activity? These are the right questions to ask because a lot of cybersecurity is activity and it's not based on outcomes for the business because it's running its own business, right? It's like you buy a sim today. It's like, oh,
mm,
great, turn it on, then you got to soak it for 6 months, and then we got to
mm,
do new behavior. Then, well, you're living with that risk, and you're not really getting an outcome. You're really getting an activity in a report that tells you a certain state.
mm,
So I think what happens is the people that run traditional businesses or the traditional side of the business that's interacting and transacting, they aren't that well aligned with the technology, which they're dependent on. They don't review it as a relationship, they view it as a dependency.
mm.
And it's only seen as a relationship when it impacts the other side of the, so there's that chasm that you need to build a bridge there. And that's where I always say is get quantitative, right? Like, so when I was working in Africa, that's how I solved the problem for this particular, I can't mention their name.
Mm,
Um, and side of the board, I said, listen, cybersecurity is not a technical issue, it's a healthcare issue.
mm,
They're like, what? We don't know what you mean. I said, right. Triage is expensive,
mm.
immunization is cheap. Immunization against these threats and risks, just like as you do in the
Great
real,
point.
and treat it that. And they said, oh, we don't have to treat everything, right? But what are the threats for your environment
Yeah.
that are going to be targeted, specific, and give you the outcomes you want to your, because they're dealing with levels of fraud we can't imagine, right?
Yeah.
So that's the only focus should be for the next 6 months, treating that, getting that and deal. And then we did those things systematically. You got to take what the risk is and put that down into specific things and then build that up inside the organization. And then some smart guy will come along and figure out how to automate all that and use AI and then sell you a product. And that's the hope. No, that's the hope because
Yeah, sure.
it's because the business does not want to run a cybersecurity business inside of
Mm.
its. But this has been the challenge with a lot of these things, right? Is
It's
that
expensive too, running your own
yeah, but
cybersecurity defense
think about it. You're
playbook.
not. I buy a firewall. I'm not just buying a firewall. I'm buying their product. We have to support it, maintain it. I got to have guys get training. I might have to hire a specialist. I got to send them. I got to send them on junkets to Vegas, to take part in it. And I'm like, all I wanted was the capability. So, but these are the real things that businesses have to contend with. And then you're getting like a CFO is going like, man, I got a $2 million budget now for running these things. We make steel ingot. Like how, but that's the thing, right? Is that those efficiencies gained through technology, they get turned on their head and they're now a spear tip pointed at your business. And you really need to dip your chief financial officer. You need to, I think to modernize things, you really need a good CTO that understands dynamic environments and understands the shared nature of data.
Mm,
And there needs to be data risk at all parts of this at the C level instead of just shoved under the CIO as it traditionally is. Because then the CFO goes, well, I'm just thinking about financials. Like, okay, well, think about the financial issue to the data asset you're managing. It's not on his spreadsheet, by the way.
mm,
Right? It is in some of the more forward-thinking ones, but it's traditionally a flat asset. It's treated like a truck.
mm.
So treating the asset upon which is building your value as something that you want to protect is a good view. And then you have a collaborative environment of how you're treating the risk. And you're going to get a financial perspective. You're going to get a risk officer's perspective. You're going to get a CTO's perspective. You're going to get a CISO's perspective. And, you know, you don't necessarily need awareness and training, but what you need to do is drive the behaviors that lead to good outcomes from that level down and from the top up, from your technology and your people.
But Jeff, you know what I'm hearing here too as well. It's a really good lesson in how CISOs, you know, they're sort of challenged. They're going to jail now, right? If they screw up, apparently. But the challenge is, how do you explain to the C-suite, like, here is the problem, and they're having a disconnect in how they're able to articulate it. And you said at the beginning of this talk here that, you know, being able to articulate something is the difference between, I don't know, success and failure. And here's these CISOs trying to explain to the C-suite why we got to do this, and maybe they're not using the right language to get this message across.
I would say it's more of an integrated risk language when you're dealing with the board and the C-suite and those type of. I've built a lot of those decks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say, like, CISOs and CTOs want to take things down to a technology level. That's what they grew up in. That's what no one wants to be in the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they know. So they always think, oh, this is a technology problem. I can buy a product or I can find a solution. Okay, you can, but at what cost? And is it going to solve the actual problem? And then, you know, really, I simplify and simplify and simplify. And then when I start speaking to them, they're like, well, you don't speak technical. I said, well, I do, but not for you guys.
Mm-hmm.
So identify the problem, 2 to 3 maximum. What is it going to have the biggest impact in your organization? Leaky credentials, unmanaged endpoints that, again, have leaky credentials. They got tokens out there, API keys, that if someone gets in, they're going to have passive access, permissive, persistent access. So if you remove access equals opportunity, right? This is all language that they speak.
Mm.
Guys, we have persistent risk. These are the 3 highest areas where we can be the most effective. These are persistent risks that will impact our data, that will impact our bottom line, and this is the potential cost if we have a breach. These are the capabilities we want to implement. This is our roadmap. Now, I've been in a lot of board meetings. Very few CISOs speak like that, because then they're defined to an outcome. They have deliverables, and that's when they want to start a consulting engagement, because they're like, if I do that, I'm on the hook. If I have an arm's length management piece, and they might not be wrong, and that might be the way to go. But those are the 3 things, is really distilling down what are people getting at, what is causing these issues, and take it from a big broad that everyone wants to paint with a broad brush, right? Like, oh, I'm a business executive, I want to do broad. I'm like, well, I'm not. I'm a risk specialist, so I want to specialize and target 3 things that affect every single system in that we use, and all our data exchanges. So if I treat 80% of our risk, good news, that leaves a very small pile which we can then deal with on our own terms and with updates, and it'll be standard stuff. But that's the biggest thing. People, they see risk, they get overwhelmed, instead of going, okay, what are the patterns that I see? What are credentials? Why is it credentials? Oh, well, simply because no one rotates their API keys. How do I fix that? Is there a solution? Is there automation? What do I need to do? And instead of what do I need to buy, it's what do I need to do? Right? Action based, right? You have the intelligence, you have the data, you have a pattern. What are the things you need to do? And those things, like, hey, we need to take some resources or hire a resource to focus on these 3 things. These are where our organization and our data, upon which we rely and build trust and credibility, is the most at risk. We're going to treat these 3 areas, and these are the sub areas.
Yeah,
and that's it. And that's it.
You know, I think this what you mentioned is a really big challenge that we're all facing, the ability for the CISOs to articulate, you know, where this all goes. And I think in a way they're getting overshadowed in that, yeah, you know, we'll deal with that later, but they're not able to articulate it the way you are, Jeff. And maybe you need to be putting a master class to CISOs to how to articulate what you need to get done.
I have a few ears, and I do spend some time on the weekend consulting with a few.
Okay.
But again, right, it's you have to understand C-level and board. They just want, like, what, like, they're always asking, what do we need to do? And most CISOs that are growing, they're highly analytical and they want to study. And it's like, no,
Mm.
what do you need to do? What are the 3 highest impact areas? You're not going to get fired for treating those. Even like, and then the part of it is you're going to fail because no one's done this stuff before.
Yeah.
So plan for your failure. Say like, man, like I think I can get 60% done this year. I would report that and go, look, if we get 25% done this year, we've exceeded our expectations, and I'll tie my performance to that.
Yeah.
Knowing I can double that. I mean, that's just smart management. That's just
Yes.
smart business. Say like, hey
Yeah.
guys, we've got 100,000 APIs. Man, if we trim up 10, this is where you got to be good at math. If we trim up 10% of our problem, this is the exponential risk we're treating. And then you've got yourself manageable, reasonable, understandable, focused outcomes.
You can finally get ahead of the curve,
Yeah.
get ahead of the game, I would say.
And then you can look for audit, like you pick a test bed and say, okay, you test it and say, okay, great. I can do 8,000 at a time. Okay. How much change can you absorb?
Hmm.
Right? Because then you have to be able to be good at negotiating the business side. How much change? Could they go out? Will there be outages? Do we need to have resources? These are in Asia Pacific, these particular data endpoints. Do we need different people? So you have to get, and that's where you need that collaboration, right? You can't just assume that you're in a silo and you know more. But people have been operating technology for years and years and years, especially stuff when you come into a new organization. They know what they need. And that's really the changes. You don't need to do broad brush. You need to do small, incremental, specified points
Yeah.
that are across large, broad swaths of risk. If I treat credential risk and clean up my endpoints, or I find a technology, like Eclypses, is that actually automates all the behaviors you want on an API endpoint
Mm.
and deals with it, then great, I can roll that out. But how far should I roll it out? Well, you need to test. And that's where I test, build a pattern, build a data set. Say, hey, we can do 5,000. We got 100,000. We can do 5,000 a day. We can do this over 20 days or space it out and treat it in a quarter with
Mm.
no impact to the business, with minimal stuff. And once we have a data set we know that works, we can find you're going to break some.
Yeah.
But you say like we expect a 20%, we expect a 20% breakage, we expect 20% outages, we expect some to drop, we will fix them and treat them special. But for
Yeah.
the rest of the stuff that's coming off this, we've tested it. We know we have a data set, we have a predictable outcome, and then you manage contingencies. But no one wants to do that work because it's not sexy, doesn't grab headlines, and it's dressed up and
Well, they
over.
need to
Yeah.
look. The threats are not imminent, right? Like we don't. Maybe we can have like tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, whatever we're going to get attacked, right? Then we all hands on deck type thing, right? But in general, it's about systematically approaching it and doing better every day until you reach a point when you're much, much more secure than you were when you started the journey. So it's definitely a way of thinking, in the cybersecurity space. How do you approach that problem? And maybe AI is a challenge that can leverage some of these things and maybe help people to kind of understand it. But
I agree.
the bad guys are using AI. What's your thought on how AI helps this mission along?
Well, the pattern that I just described, if someone can use AI to automate that and like identify the current status of your endpoint, do the automatic update, do your patching, well, there's 50%. The other 50% is like you're looking at things that remove risk around data and all that stuff. And great. There are solutions, including our own, that help with that, right? That we actually, ours is we deal with the top 8 of the top 10 OWASP. We did a review with OWASP. OWASP top 10 API data risks. Misconfiguration is still an issue. But again, you've got 80% treated now. You can focus on treating your configs and your stuff when you're trying to get all that stuff brought down if you don't systematically approach it. So you could do that in 6 months and then have 80% of your problem and deal with your configurations, all that stuff, because you've embedded. You're not going to be able to get something. You have to look at the left side now. That's clear to me. It's like, I think the current enterprise SIM activity tracking, network-based stuff, we know that's a known commodity. Find that as cheap as you can, get the capability you want, and don't worry about what gaps there are. And then start focusing on those systematic things and tightening up your data and your shared spaces. That I think needs to be done. I very few people that I'm not working with are doing that.
Well, if you look at something that we are seeing, right? That a lot of because now the bad actors have access to AI, they're making the
Yeah,
phishing attacks, social
that's where I'm
engineering.
just gonna go. So
Yeah,
that process that I described, they use in reverse,
right.
right? They're firing up an AI, a generative AI, or whatever you want. There's 1,000 names. I'll just call
Yeah.
it generative AI instance. And they're going out and flashing all these endpoints. They're getting your, it's what information are you getting? It's like the old house like you can drive down the street, take note of I know the address, street, location, right? You have a map, but you don't know the territory.
Mm-hmm.
Gap that AI covers in a huge way is you have a map, you have the assets, and now you know the territory. That's the danger. And so that's the scale you have to fight against. So your solutions now have to be at that scale and immediate. You don't have 8 months.
Mm.
You can't say like, oh, 2025, we're going to get after this. It's like, yeah, these guys are figuring out this stuff. They're getting a better map, a more detailed map of the territory, of your territory. And, how are you going to deal with their malform requests? How are you going to stop your tokens from leaking? How are you going to stop passive persistent access? We saw that with Dell. They impersonated a company. Dell gave
Mm.
them 49 million records. So when you have these automated data exchanges, you have to look for automated tooling because AI is going to automate that tooling to use against you.
Mm-hmm.
And you're seeing that. And that's like, I don't have data on this. This is, we'll call this, and I'm intuiting this. I have a suspicion. All these hacks have you noticed in the last 2 years, hacks have exploded?
Mm-hmm.
There's only one reason, because the toolkits and everything they need to do now, they can just build that into an AI and run it when they want. Right? They go out and go, hey, I found e-channel news. Great. Well, let's see what they got. And then they suck it all in. And then now it would take a hacker, like when you're doing a red team, doing that passive, we call that real estate scanning, or you're
Mm-hmm.
looking for real estate or footprint or fingerprint,
Yeah.
multiple terms. That's done now. Like we used to have to sit down and figure that out and go, okay, well, we can attack this and do this. And we've seen this. And do we have any vulnerability? And now they just build a database and it's done. The generative AI automates the data point. It's grabbing all that. So you're fighting a battle now where your defensive capabilities have to stop offensive capabilities that no one dreamed we'd have.
Mm.
And it's an engineering challenge, because then you have to build better bulletproof glass. You have to build better solutions. Now, if you're at scale and you got there's roughly 200, a quarter of a billion automated data exchange points or APIs running, you're not doing that one at a time. And those are ones that we know about, that are known. The other side, the dark side, we don't know because they don't report. They're not on an asset on a spreadsheet anywhere. So, and then then you have to understand, like, these guys have access to the same tools you do.
Mm.
And you see the reports. It's like, yeah, I can see this. If they can sniff one little weakness, they can exploit that now in ways that are more systematic, more persistent, and target. They're not going to just take down your service anymore. They want the data, they want to trade it, they want the value out of it, right?
Mm.
And again, it goes to the human condition. People always say, like, what's the most valuable data? People say credit card data, and I say no. That would be healthcare data. If you've got someone that you can get an ID and get them healthcare information that they can go get healthcare treatment under a false pretense, that's much more powerful and much more immediate, right? So that's where people they kind of miss the field, the forest for the trees a little bit. It's like, why do healthcares get targeted? I said, they have a business you can run. They're not in the business of a one-time business. They're in the business of, we need reoccurring data. That's why they continue to do it. So when you
Interesting.
think about their outcomes, you have to then say, like, okay, man, how do I approach this? How do I lock down my data? How do I again, like a lot of the stuff that people think are secure, it's like, how many third parties you got, right? So traditionally, websites are secured, or the network is secured with TLS. That's not something you control. That's someone else's certificate.
Mm.
How many times you rotate your TLS keys? Is that on anyone's? Maybe once a year, maybe. So if someone gets your keys, they've got a permanent session established. They get a key, it's in, they're in. There's nothing you can do. So that's the problem with session-based ID. And then again, like, I don't have to beat your $10 million of application security or stuff. I just have to beat the router tech at one of the internet companies that's paid $16 an hour and he's left TCP dump on. I can walk in there and get a whole host of data. So that's
It's
where you,
alarming to say the least, Jeff. You know, one of the things that we see beyond the fact that these things, I would almost like to take back my words that I said that the threat is not imminent, because it used to be, as a human, as a hacker, a bad actor, you had, you know, you had to spend time, you had to invest your life and hours, and you could only do so much in any given day. But now with AI, leveraging AI, they can actually automate all that, and they could literally be fishing while they sleep, you know, type thing. So at scale, maybe, you know, because they're using these tools, maybe the ability for them to get through is how
I
many
heard a
times
great,
better?
I heard a great quote from a guy who's doing some red teaming.
Mm,
And he said, we've gone from the age of the artisan hacker to now heavy equipment AI is really heavy equipment now. Like you got multiple earth movers, cranes that can move tons of
factory.
yeah, it's industrialized now. That's really where we are. So you need industrialized, you need a mindset of systematic, programmatic, industrialized security. Otherwise, and the problem is software architecture is still the domain of the creative. Like those
Mm.
people are incredibly creative in how they architect all these components to work together.
They're
Right.
smart people.
Yeah, I mean
What?
that's what drew me. That's what draws me to it. It's an express. I like to express myself. At least my logical stuff. I like to
Mm,
express myself that way. So that formulates some of the thinking. We're like, oh, but of course, like Bob over at so and so, he would never, he would never use it for evil. I was like, well, once it's out there though, that's the downside with the collaborative, high trust, sharing environments, and you need that to progress the base software forward. So it's not like you can just dispose of it and say we're going to work in silos and never speak. That's not going to happen. So again, so when we move and progress for what we want for building better business, and let's the the benefits that AI can have for us as global citizens is immense, right? It's not let's like you're talking, improvements to the environment, improve shipping.
mm,
There's great things that it can do for us. So I don't like getting way down in like all the negative stuff. However, like anything else, however that person perceives that tool in their hand, they're going to put that to the canvas.
mm,
So, to be wary of that and say, great, that's going to change the landscape. How do I adapt? Right? It's like, what incremental changes do I need to make that what I know yesterday does not apply today? Because if someone can sit out there and not tick off your defenses and not do a DDoS, like you're spending all this money with these network port technologies, and they're able to get your credentials, you're in trouble.
mm.
And if they're able to pull these things forward and through, and you don't have a response, or you haven't thought about these scenarios, you're in trouble again. So that's where it's like you can't just like the CISO just can't be responsible for security or application security. It's integrated. The CRO, the CTO. It's, hey guys, our business. What's the foundation of the business? One, the people. Two, your business processes which you allow to transact, and three, the data which you build and consume as part of this ecosystem. So if you treat the risk as an ecosystem and everyone has a part, you can build that systematic approach. That's tough though, because no C-level wants to take on more than they have to. In terms of risk and accountability, well, I mean, they're not wrong either. It's like, I'm the CFO. Why do I want to be accountable? It's like, well, you're going to write the check to the SEC for $9.5 million when we get hacked.
Yeah.
Are you? Can we take that out of your stock holdings? Well, no. Great. Then we're all in this together, and that's how you frame those goals, and just remove that noise around like, oh, we got all these problems. No, we don't.
Mm,
These are what we're seeing, right? It's like good goal scorers, they go where the ball is going to be, right? Like a good baseball player swings where the pitch is going to be, not where it was.
mm,
You make great contact and you're going to strike out some. But as soon as you have that mentality that, like, hey, I got to be somewhere else in order to protect the business and allow us to move forward, a lot of things that you're fighting against will just snap into shape. Like, I got to do this. Like, I've got to think about ways to move my endpoints and how I exchange data. Is there a solution? Is there a technology or capabilities or multiple technologies and capabilities that I need to build into these to treat these three areas? Because they have higher risk and higher impact to our business.
mm.
And that's where it starts, is that you have to do that analysis to say, like, hey man, like, what happens if? right? Not business continue, like, like people always talk about disaster recovery. But, they end up taking themselves offline because, they didn't protect a certain point. So it's like if they had focused and specialized, they would have treated it. But again, too, it's like, if you have one vulnerability now and you've got 100,000 endpoints, that might be exponentially at 100,000. And if someone can find that through AI, they're going to get you. So
Yeah,
what
well,
you
even if you go, if you can recover, right, with your data, but they've already stolen it, right? Then, what's you're already at risk now, because now they don't even care. As a matter of fact, even if they steal encrypted data, they're waiting a little bit longer, get some quantum computing and decrypt it anyway at some point. So
Yeah, we've seen that. I've seen that. It's not just today. It's not just yesterday, today. It's also the future. It's like if they've got your data, and it's just with the traditional encryption, right? We're talking about that quantum piece, right?
yeah.
So we were one of the first companies we've put Crystal Kyber into our algorithm for our encryption product, and that's great because companies now can adopt us and put it in their applications, and it's done in 2 steps instead of the other 50. So there's things that people are thinking like, hey, how do I help someone systematically? This is how you do it. And then we thought beyond that, and so we have at least quantum resistance. So if someone gets your data, they're never going to be able to see the data,
Mm.
but they're never going to be able to crack it either because it's not patternized. It's not done with one session. The entire encryption scheme isn't one key. Where we did is we took a lot of disparate technologies in encryption and brought them into one place. So you get automated one-time keyed encryption per data packet. We remove that third-party risk, and that's because that's what the demand is of the market. People are like, hey, I want to do this. I want to do this effectively. I want to do it affordably, but it's got to be in the left. I got to engineer this. I got to take it out to my endpoints.
Mm.
And I can't have some third party spewing my data out there. And we went,
Mm,
okay,
for
we'll
sure.
raise our hand and do it. But that does not change. That's one aspect. That does not change your development, your code, your maintenance, your patching, all the other stuff that you need to do. I would say that, the promise of AI, someone else is using AI to figure out your state. Once they figure out your state, log out. So you should use AI to figure out your own state and target those things. Because it's like, everyone focuses on, we got to do PAM and this stuff. And it's like, okay, you do. What are the latest things? What's the lightest weight you can do it?
Mm.
Because it's like you have that, but then you're not treating risk.
Mm.
Now you're into activities again. Like, does it treat risk or does it give you a check mark? Like compliance, this is where compliance doesn't equal security. That's a statement in every single auditor's form. Like, we find you compliant. That does not guarantee that your data is da 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 da. So that's the mentality that you got to break. It's like, I want security that is active. I have to do things. It's not a check mark on a compliance form. These are active things, that behaviors that I need to have embedded in my people and my software or in my assets that are exchanging data.
Well, Jeff, we're gonna have to have more part twos and threes because I could keep picking your brain for hours, my friend. Look, this is important stuff to have the entire world of the folks that's defending, these cyber attacks. They need to up their game. That's sort of what we're trying to do is pass on the education from the wisdom to them so they can understand how they can move that needle up. But before we jump off, let me know what does Eclypses do? Like what's the solution about, by the way?
Yeah, so we took a look at the market some back in 2016 when we started the engineering phase of this, and I wasn't with the company at the time. Um, they're like, man, we're seeing a lot of in transit, we call it in transit risk, data being intercepted, credentials, all that stuff. They said we gotta build something better. So like, I mean, there's difference. You got HSMs that will deliver a key and certificate authorities that will give you your certificate. And so what Eclypses did, the engineering side of it, is they said, what we can do is we can secure that whole channel and remove third parties from it. So you stand up your endpoint, our API product is our flagship product. We do apps and mobile as well. And what we do is the minute or whatever data that application generates, whether it's credential, a JWT token, username, password, whatever, we grab that, encrypt it, shift it, and then replace it. And that's when we say the MicroToken Exchange. That's what happens. So if someone's looking at your stream, they don't see anything. They can't see credentials. They can't see the data itself. It's unrecognizable. And that flows back into your network, into your operating environment, and then we decrypt it and put it in the database. So that whole in transit where you're exchanging and where the risk is, we deal with that. And we took a lot of the feature, again, the behaviors that we want, right? Like you got 50,000 APIs, you're not gonna manage, you're not gonna do key exchanges or tokens because that's persistent, and then you got a third party. So what we want to do is every time we exchange it, we grab that, encrypt it, shift it, and obscure it, and then we get it sent down. So no one, even if someone's looking at it, they can't see it. And it's a unique encoding. And what I mean by that is that even if someone's trying to send us, trying to brute force us or send us something, we won't, it's not encoded properly, we won't respond to it. We drop it. So
Okay.
and that allows us to then authenticate your endpoint and authenticate the data coming from the endpoint. So you don't have any more authenticated, your data is not at risk, it's not exposed. And you're moving from a thing where it's like, well, we're just relying on the network to provide the encryption. It's like, no, we own the data, we're going to encrypt it ourselves. So we've taken that, democratized it, distribute it, and containerized it. So you can just stand it up in the, we're just standing up in the cloud. It's a container on the back end. It's 2 changes on the front end. We've got it simplified. You can drop it into any app, any API, and off you go.
Wow. Is this for like an enterprise costing situation, or can anybody afford this? Can regular
No,
businesses?
we took the approach. And the other thing, just before I walk into the costing, the other thing is you can set it as a policy. So you can say to your partners, say, hey guys, this is our policy now. We'd like you to, any APIs that you've got in our environment, we'd like you to put this technology in it. You can work out the costing on the back end, right?
Hmm.
But we're getting great response with that. And no, we have an individual container consumption base for people that do a single app on demand or a few things. And, like a container, our service will support multiple endpoints, depending on how much data you generate.
Right.
We'd have to do a fit to say that might be 2, that might be 100, depending on how huge the scale is. I mean, we're constantly looking to improve the efficiency of our product. And that's what we do. So we have, if you get it down, it's we're at $2,000 a month for a single container, and that can support an app, a few APIs, and potentially a mobile app for a small business. As it grows up, you're going to want a little bit more. You'll want to do a cluster, but it's from the smallest right through the enterprise. We cover
Okay.
everyone because we want everyone to have it and we want everyone to use it and get the benefits. It's we met with an insurance guy and he was like, "This is the best insurance policy I've seen." And I'm like, well, I appreciate that. And that's where we're going for. We don't want it to make it out of the reach of the small guy. It's like, because you have to remember, a lot of these mid-sized businesses are consuming large data sets from the enterprise.
Yeah.
So, it's better to give them an affordable solution that targets their specific problems in data exchanges and then doesn't add cost to the bottom line. There's no new resources. You got an engineer on staff today, you can put it in. It's done like
Makes
that.
sense.
Yeah.
I'm assuming here, Jeff, it's not a rocket science to spin this up, right? It's all SaaS based. The thing just runs itself. So it grabs your data, fixes, locks it down, encrypts it, like you said, switch it around, whatever, and then sends it over. So in transit, nobody can see it.
Yeah, it does, and it doesn't. Even if it moves across another hop or another network, you don't lose your encryption. You're not, again, you're removing when we went through some of the certification pieces. One of the things that and you're sending your data across, you're not you're not generating your own encryption key. You're that TLS, someone's giving that to you, right? Your network is giving that to you, so
Mhm.
it's a risk to your business.
Yeah.
How do you get around that? It's like, well, okay, well, people are like, oh, we got TLS. Like, great. Well, so did these 400 companies.
Yeah.
All their credentials got leaked. So then again, it's like, that's where we want to play. And we want to remove that hop risk where it's like, you're sending it across the internet. We are the best for that.
Got it. Interesting stuff because, like what I think 73% of the internet traffic is APIs, right?
It's probably more than that now.
I
Yeah.
gotta update my numbers. The reality is data is exchanged constantly, right?
Yeah.
Even when you buy anything, Facebook, it doesn't really matter anymore. It's just exchanged back and forth everywhere. So that's a vulnerability for sure in transit, without a doubt.
Yeah. And again, our APIs, because they can just put it in the API pipeline. It goes out they can do one update. It goes out to every single endpoint and they're protected. They even increase their posture
Mm.
exponentially with a shift left. And that's the only, and again, in an automated fashion, when you've got industrialized people attacking you, you need an industrial response.
Mm.
And that's why we've chosen that. It's like, yeah, you do this once, you can solve your API problems. And then you can talk to your partners and say, hey, this works for us. We're at our edge, right?
Mm.
We're called Eclypses. So we're at the the edge, and then we work back
Clip
in.
the edge. I get it.
And then they can just go to their partner and say, hey man, we know you got a couple hundred APIs in our environment. This is our policy. Can you put this on your stuff? We want to make sure that we don't have any risk stuff that we're sending you.
Mm.
So you've shut off, you've dealt
That's
with
good for them too, right, Jeff?
Yeah, well, it's
So
it's a shared.
they should adopt it too.
It's a shared risk ecosystem.
Absolutely.
But the main part is at your edge, you're dealing with your risk, your data secure, it's being transmitted securely, and you're not leaking JWT tokens if you don't rotate your API keys. All those behaviors you want are automated in the product, and you can set it and forget it, and it will run.
Just been an absolute pleasure. I mean, there's a lot for the channel, to kind of understand this game. It's not as easy it used to be in the channel business these days. Although, Salesforce just did a survey, and 89% of all the business in the world right now is going through channels. So everybody in the chain has to figure this thing out, and it's like you said, it's a shared risk. And the more we all learn and educate ourselves about what is and what's coming, the better we can figure out how to keep protecting ourselves. The website, by the way, it's eclypses.com, right?
That's correct. Yep.
Just been a pleasure. Keep us posted if you see anything crazy out there. Give us a holler, and so we can make sure we spread the word. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Okay. Take care. Have a great day.
You too.